Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Rules of Engagement. As always, I'll be your host, Nick axslav Ranish, and today we're going to analyze the Mana vs. Bly series. This series went to 4 games, however, we're just going to be looking at 3, as the first game was not too much to take away from that one. Bly just went for a very early attack, and Mana parried it easily with great scouting and use of photon cannons. So we're going to start off with this show looking at game number 2, then we'll take a look at game number 3, then, of course, game number 4. And at the end of the show is going to be the viewer Q&A. So submit any questions you guys want answered. Tweet them to me at axslav, and I'll answer them at the end of this show. If I don't get them to this show, I'll get them to tomorrow's show. So tweet any questions you want, and they will be answered, I assure you. But right now, let's jump into game number 2, Mana vs. Bly on Daybreak. And this is a point when Bly is down by 1 map. Mana, of course, won game number 1. So he's kind of on the short end of the stick right now, and we're going to first look at Hydralisk-based defense, defending against Protoss aggression using Hydralisk, then how to understand short-term army development, how armies grow and develop in the short term in Starcraft 2, and also how to construct a split-second battle plan based on what you see when you see exactly what your opponent has and how it is all positioned. So we're going to start off jumping into this game on Daybreak around the 8-minute mark. In our oops. This is actually the first game. Loaded up. Well, let me get this one loaded up first, and I'll go over kind of exactly what's going to go on in this. And what's going to happen is Bly basically starts off with a kind of a fast lair tech build, which is he's been doing all series. Of course, game number 1, he started with a 1-base Roacholon. But this game, as we can see here, actually, let's just follow Bly's camera movement, and we can follow him. So as we're fast-forwarding up to when interesting stuff happens, he goes with a pretty fast lair attack, a very standard opening. But one thing that's interesting is that he takes a third base, and he kind of drones it aggressively, even though it's... Or no, sorry, he doesn't drone aggressively. He takes a third base, and he doesn't drone aggressively, and uses the lair tech just to go to Hydralisk. This is something that isn't very common to see. Typically, when someone goes very fast lair, if it's Hydralisk, it's like a Nidus all-in or a drop all-in, or maybe they're doing something a little bit different, like a fast Meatless play or Swarm Host. Or they'll just get the lair tech for scouting abilities, and it'll jump to third. What Bly does is really interesting, because as we can see here, he's in this position where he gets a third base, but he doesn't actually work drones on it, right? And his lair tech is for this Hydralisk den, but you know, you can't really go 2-base Hydra and bust up the front, right? I mean, your opponent has cannons, they'll have the Mothership Core ready to defend with Photon Overcharge, Force Field, so you're kind of saying, okay, my economy is going to be roughly equal to my opponent. Right now, he's slightly ahead, but Mana will catch up. So my economy is going to be roughly equal to my opponent, and I'm just going to rely on Hydralisk. Now, that may seem kind of crazy, because everyone knows as armies scale up, Hydralisks aren't very effective. But what the cool thing about Hydralisk is they can be efficient in defense in small numbers. So to see here, one key thing that Bly is going to do is he notices his opponent might be moving out to attack him pretty soon, right? He sees there's no third base, my opponent's still on 2 bases, he's poking out with units, he's probably coming to attack me, right? And so he's teched too fast to really have a strong economy, right? There's no workers at his third base, the economy's almost exactly even. So what he wants to do is, you know, he basically wants to use Hydralisk to engage as soon as possible. Because the longer he waits, the bigger both armies get. And as armies get really big, force fields become very effective against Hydralisk. But what you can do is you can use Hydralisk to defend on a low economy if you catch your opponent before they actually get a big army. As they're moving across the map, of course, they went across the map fast. And then you catch them before they get too many warp-ins. So, of course, they can use the force fields to zone out the Zerglings and keep their sentries alive. But right at this point, right, if we look at the army values, Bly is ahead, but not by an astronomical amount, right? And, of course, you have to realize that some of that extra army is in units that are just being produced or being rallied out of here, right? So it's not all in the actual battle. There's 150 resources there, 300, 450, 500 resources that aren't even in this battle immediately. But it's okay, because at low army values, Hydralisks are very efficient, because there's the area is too big to force field out many Hydralisks because there's only a few of them. They can work around whatever force fields you have. So you want to engage your opponent as soon as possible if you're using Hydralisk-based defense. Of course, if you had a ton of Hydralisks, all of a sudden they can, and they have a ton of sentries, they can cut your Hydralisk in half and then engage your Hydralisk half at a time. So you really want to make those engagements as soon as possible when going Hydralisk. As he fast forward here, of course, he's going to do a small little bit of a counterattack here. He's going to get some damage done. Of course, Cybernetics Core is always great to kill, as well as, you know, gateways and forges are always nice too. So getting some damage done here, but of course, mana with many units is able to overrun this without too much of a problem and get a pretty cost-efficient trade. So now the important thing about here is we're looking from Mana's perspective, right? Let's look at this from Mana's perspective. He just held off a Hydralisk attack. He wants to do a 2-base aggressive build, right? He's up to 9 gateways. He's got charge. He's got DTs, which can go into Archons. He's really looking to put the pressure on his opponent and not let it go up to a really higher economic standpoint. So one thing he does, he sends his DT out to scout and see what's going on. And the first thing he's going to notice here is that his opponent is on 2-base economy, right? Bly does have this 3rd base here, but there's 0 drones. In fact, if you go over to the income tab, in fact, Mana has 5 more workers than his opponent. We can see up there it's 49 to 44, which of course means Mana has the 5 extra workers there. So it's roughly even economy, 2 base versus 2 base. And as a Protoss, if you're facing a Zerg who's on low tech and you have even economy, in the short term, over the next few minutes, you're gonna get stronger faster than they will, because you can both add X amount of resources of units. But as I mentioned earlier, the Zerg low-tech units, the Zerglings, the Roaches, the Hydralisks, as armies scale up, force fields get more effective versus them, and all of a sudden, they start becoming less cost-efficient, and whereas your units, as you scale them up, become more and more cost-efficient. So if you're ever a Protoss, you know your Zerg's on low-tech units, and you know they're on even economy, there's no drones at the 3rd, in the short term, you want to delay the engagement. Of course, maybe 10 minutes from now, like the next 3 minutes, the Zerg could drone up and tech up, and then another 3 minutes after that, they could have this giant army you can't deal with. But over just a few minute period of time, you're going to get stronger faster than they will. So you want to delay the engagement for at least a few minutes in this type of situation. Unfortunately, Mana, he's feeling a little bit bloodthirsty, right? So he wants to go out and really get some damage done. And he says, you know what? If he has no drones at a 3rd, that means I should just go ahead and go kill him because he's probably pretty weak, right? But really, he has no drones at a 3rd because he's making units, so it's kind of the opposite idea. But now, you know, Mana wants to go in and get some damage done. And this is something that happens to you a lot. You're on an attack. At this point, he doesn't know what units his opponent has, right? Until right about now, right? All of a sudden, at this point, this is exactly the point where he's figured out exactly what's going on here, right? You can see his opponent has a bunch of Roaches and Hydralisks, and he's got Zealots and Archons, and the Roaches and Hydralisks are on a choke point here. This is a point in every game you have where if you don't have an observer on the opponent's army, which you won't always have, you don't know exactly their composition and the way their forces are positioned, you've got to make some split-second battle decision plans here, right? So Mana's in a position where right now he feels he needs to do catch-up because he doesn't have a 3rd base. The Zerg has a 3rd base done. He's like, I need to do catch-up. And because I've got a bunch of warp gates, I want to do my catch-up offensively, right? Utilize these warp gates to get on the offensive. I mean, another option would just be run all the way back home, take his own 3rd, tech up to robotics units, and play catch-up defensively by investing in teching up. But he wants to do it offensively, which is a fair option if you have a lot of warp gates. You've got a lot of fast, heavy damage-dealing units like Zealots and Archons. So if you want to do catch-up offensively, but you notice this army, he can't beat that, right? Maybe if he's got a flank or perfect surround, he could beat it. But right now, if he tries to send his units up after it, right, what's going to happen? If he sends these guys in here, the Roaches, they're just going to skedaddle backwards, right? And on creep, they can, on creep, they can just back up, and they'll just keep kiting him forever, and he'll just die. Basically, the way faster units that have a stronger range attack than him as well. So he can't handle that army, right? But look at where he's positioned. Right now, he's in an ideal spot to really knock down this hatchery, right? And he's got a mothership core right here that he can use to recall if he tucks it back around behind his units. So right here he says, I need to do catch-up, I need to do damage, I can't take his army. So this is where your instant battle plans, grab all your guys, right-click this hatchery, Mothership Core can kind of come around back here, and then once this hatchery is dead, your group of guys can then come back here and you hit the recall button, go back home, and you'll lose some units, right? You'll lose some units. You know, you may lose 5 or 6 zealots. But it's probably worth it to get the hatchery kill, because then your opponent can't really drone up because they have to rebuild a hatchery first to get a place to mine from. And you're on even footing economically speaking as the game goes on. Of course, you still got to worry about the army, but when you go home, you can build double robos. You can tech for storm. I mean, he's actually got a lot of gas up here. We can see that the gas quantity is very high. So you do double robos, tech for storm. You can do some DT harass with war prisms in the main, because a low econ Zerg's going to be kind of stressed to make a whole lot of overseers. Each overseer is roughly a roach or less. So, you know, there's a lot of things you can do from this position, right? If you just focus down this hatchery and then go on to retreat before you lose too many units. Unfortunately, Mana feels he's compelled to actually make a full engagement here. And, in fact, actually, you could have just, instead of using recall, you could have time warped here, focused it, and just ran backwards. Although speed roaches and hydras with the speed upgrade would be annoying off creep, but, you know, maybe you get some of your guys out. So instead he feels he wants to make an actual engagement. So he does the right thing in not chasing where they can kite, and from here, he can engage from multiple angles. But you can see here, it's still on creep, and as soon as he runs into engage, Bly backs up and gets in the exact same position we talked about, where the Zerg can just keep kiting, get on a ramp, then you've got to run back because you don't want to find a ramp, and then you're losing more zealots. Great use of time, so we can't fight backwards anymore, but already too many zealots have died. And then without the zealots in front, the Archons go down very, very fast. And now at this point, Bly just has too many units. I mean, you can engage again, but it's just that the army difference is too big. Bly's able to defend this engagement. And then as the game goes on, he's got the map control and the advantage going forward. So that wraps up game number 2. Bly struck back and even up 1-1. And the really cool thing about that game was how assertive he was with the defense of his Hydrodus. Let me actually jump back really quickly and take one more look at that first initial defense that he had there. It's right around here. So one thing that I thought was really cool here is a lot of Zerg players, right? When they see this army moving out here, let's say you're a Zerg player, you see this army moving out right here. What you're going to do with your units is you're going to tuck them all over here, right? You're going to put them all by your third base and get this defense set up. But one thing you have to remember is that if you delay the engagement, what you're going to have is you're going to have a lot of Hydra that's fighting a lot of sentries and stalkers, and you're going to get cut in half, and Sentry Stalker, as it grows, will actually beat Hydrodus, especially in a spot where you have that hatchery. So instead, remember, if you're using Hydrodus to defend, right, don't sit back. You want the engagement to happen as soon as possible before the armies scale up too much, because as the armies scale up, it's going to be worse and worse and worse for you, unless you have an economic advantage. But of course, in this game, well, I never really had the economic advantage. So be very, very aggressive when you use Hydras to defend. It's almost an aggressive style of defending where you catch your opponent before they get in position. Use that if you got Hydras. And of course, as the game goes on, it's important to understand the short-term army growth implications. If you're Protoss fighting Hydras, back away and let the armies grow up. If you're a Zerg player, keep those engagements happening as fast as possible. Wraps up game number 2 between Mana and Bly. We'll take a short break and be right back with game number 3.